nice introduction.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It is a thrill for me as a travel teacher to be able to share with you about an hour of the lessons I've learned from spending about the last half of my life living out of a suitcase in Europe. And you know, it's fun not to preach to the choir, but if I was ever going to preach to a choir, you're the group I'd like to talk to. So we're all in this for the same reason, to inspire people, especially students, and the next generation to broaden their perspectives through travel. You know, recently it's occurred to me that a big power in our country is fear. And I've been thinking a lot about this, and it's clear to me from all my travels that fear is for people who don't get out very much. And together, we're getting people out, and we're overcoming fear. And that makes us, I think, leaders in our society. And we have a great mission to help and inspire young people to be more comfortable with the other 96% of humanity. So I'd like to just share with you my idea of traveling as a political act, traveling as a global classroom. And we'll talk for about an hour, and then I guess we've got some time for Q&A. And afterwards, I'd love to hang out in the lobby there and just further answer questions or whatever you like after we're out of this room for people who want to. You know, I never wanted to travel in the beginning. I remember my parents dragged me to Europe when I was 14 years old. My dad imported pianos, and we had to go see the piano factories in Germany and then go visit relatives up in Norway. And I remember distinctly as a 14-year-old with a bad attitude in Europe thinking this is really stupid. But on about day 2, it occurred to me it's not all that bad. There was different candy, there's different pop. I distinctly remember statuesque women with hairy armpits in Germany. And I remember a couple years after that, I saw kids just a couple years older than me with rucksacks and Eurail passes. I was in the Copenhagen train station with my mom and dad, and those kids, Europe was their playground. And I remember looking at my mom and dad, and then looking at those kids who were free as the wind, looking back at my mom and dad, thinking, I don't need you guys for this. Europe can be my playground too. And I promised to go back to Europe every year after that, and I have. At first, I was traveling just for kicks. My students wouldn't practice in the summer, so I'll take the summer off. We'll see you in September. I'm going to Europe. And I was learning from my mistakes, and I thought if I could just package the lessons I've learned from my mistakes into a class or a book or whatever, people could learn from my mistakes rather than their own and travel smoother. So that was kind of how I got started in this. I remember struggling when I was a college kid. I wanted to do something meaningful and you know, positive, and I wasn't convinced that promoting travel was a good idea. When I was very little, my first images of travel was rich white Americans on luxury cruise ships in the Caribbean, gathered on the deck and throwing nickels off of the deck and photographing what they called little dark kids jumping for their coins. And that was sort of a highlight of their trip, was to throw coins off the deck and film the little local kids jumping for them. And I just thought, that's not my idea of travel, really. And even today, that notion of travel persists. I think for a lot of Americans, travel is still see if you can eat 5 meals a day and still snorkel when you get into port. And when I say that at a cruise convention, people fidget nervously in their seat and think, where's he going with this? But you know, I'm not saying that's not good, but it's just not travel. You know, it's hedonism. And I've got no problem with hedonism. I'm a Lutheran, but for me, travel should bring people together. And that's what I've sort of dedicated my teaching to, and I think that's what you do in your mission, is help bring people together. And it's such a powerful force these days in our society if we can equip and encourage and inspire young people to get more comfortable with everybody beyond our border. Now, I've been teaching for 30 years. I didn't have a grand plan, but when I look back on it, it's kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You know, first I was doing the traveler's lower rungs. My first decade in the 80s, it was all cheap tricks, packing light, staying healthy, catching the train, finding a good hotel. Europe Through the Back Door was my main book then. The next decade, I was sliding up that hierarchy into more important things about travel. My book was Europe 101. It was appreciating the history and the art and the cuisine and the culture and the wine and all of that. And then since about 9/12, my passion really has been for traveling in a way that broadens our perspective. And for the last decade, I find myself talking about travel as a valuable force for peace, a way for us to better understand the rest of the world. And that's really what my theme is now. When we think about travel, when we're putting together these foreign study programs and so on, there's so much magic that our travelers can take in to their whole being. I mean, you gain a better appreciation of nature. Now, my beat is Europe, so I'll be talking mostly about Europe, but it works everywhere. But for me, when you go to Europe, you can find yourself gaining a lifelong appreciation for nature. I mean, you can be high in the Swiss Alps. Imagine this, tight roping on a ridge. On one side, you got lakes stretching all the way to Germany. On the other side, you got the most incredible alpine panorama anywhere, the Eiger Monken Jungfrau. And ahead of you, you hear the long legato tones of an Alp horn announcing that the helicopter-stocked mountain hut is open. It's just around the corner, and the coffee schnapps is on. Now, that's a beautiful moment. Anybody can have that if they can just get out there and get on top of that ridge and take a hike. You gain an appreciation for culture when you travel. I just love, as 25 years as a tour guide, to get people into an area where they find people who are enthusiastic about something you didn't know you could be enthusiastic about. Take cheese, for instance. When I grew up, cheese was no big deal. It was orange and the shape of the bread. Here you go, cheese sandwich. And then you go to France, and they're evangelical about cheese, aren't they? I mean, you go into a cheese shop, and it's a festival of mold. And in my work, I love to be the bumpkin. I'm just the wide-eyed, curious American, and my sophisticated French friends who run restaurants take me to the market in the morning. And I'll never forget my friend taking me to this market in Paris and going through all the goat cheese, picking up a moldy wad, taking a deep whiff. Oh, Rick, smell this cheese. It smells like the feet of angels. Cheese smells like the feet of angels. Okay, well, you're into cheese. Now, you don't need to embrace that and go home and be crazy about cheese, but it is valuable to know that there are people who are really excited about cheese, you see. I know from my own experience as a tour guide, a lot of Americans are sort of put off by that. They draw back and clench their fist and say, are you telling me we're less sophisticated or that we're wrong? We fought and died for your way of life, and I'm not going to let you tell me that cheese is good. You see, well, it's not that. It's like third grade show and tell. It's just somebody's excited about something, and let's all celebrate it. In our travels, we can celebrate things that you didn't know you could celebrate. History becomes meaningful when you travel. I know that from my own personal experience. I got a history degree at the University of Washington accidentally. I remember waking up in the dorm one morning, and it occurred to me, I have 7 history classes under my belt. It was just storytelling. I was surprised they were giving credits for it, because I had traveled, and for me it was just fun to learn about what I had seen. I thought 3 more classes, and I'm a historian. Let's push on through. So I just find that when we take our travelers to Europe or wherever, it's exciting and important for our travelers to know that history is real. It's today, it's happening. We're not just spectators, we're part of it. A good example of that is I was in Berlin on the opening day of their new parliament building recently, and I just happened to be on the very top of this thing. Now, you know, of course, Berlin divided, capital goes to Bonn, end of the Cold War, capital goes back to Berlin. The old Reichstag building was just a bombed-out hulk on no man's land. In good European style, they didn't bulldoze the old building and build a new one. They renovated the old one and then incorporated a modern architectural element into the top of that, this glorious glass dome. Now they have a building that has roots into its past and is looking into the future. It's free, it's open all the time, designed primarily for Germans, but tourists are more than welcome to go up the spiral ramp to the very top. And powerful architectural symbolism, designed so you can literally look down over the shoulders of your legislators and see what's going on in their desks. The Germans have been jerked around by their politicians too much in the last century, and this is a powerful statement that this will be government for the people, by the people, of the people. I was up on top of that dome on opening day, surrounded by teary-eyed Germans. Now, anytime you're surrounded by teary-eyed Germans, something exceptional is going on. And it occurred to me, wow, I'm here sharing and witnessing this exciting, emotional moment with the opening of this great building, the symbolic closing of an ugly chapter in the history of a great nation. No more division, no more communism, no more fascism, no more war, a united country with a new Capitol building looking into a promising future. Many of those teary eyes were old enough to remember when Berlin was literally flattened after World War II. What a triumph. And on top of that building that day, I noted I was surrounded by other American tourists who were completely clueless. It's just, I'm out of batteries, why don't they air condition this place? I need a Coke. And it saddened me. I thought, man, I am living in a dumbed down society. And in a lot of ways we are. There are powerful forces in our society that would find it convenient if we were all just dumbed down. And when people say just go shopping, red flags should go up. We need to be engaged. We need to, in our own work, whatever our work is, challenge our neighbors, challenge our students, challenge our readers and our viewers and our clients and whatever to be engaged, to be changed by their experience, to make a difference. It is scary when we start to celebrate this anti-intellectualism in our country, and all of us have a beautiful opportunity and a great responsibility to help smart our society up instead of dumb it down. And I'll tell you, in your realm as in mine, I'm in public broadcasting and so on, this kind of thinking offends certain people, and we need to be strong and we need to be courageous, we need to speak out. It is important for the fabric of our democracy that we have a smart electorate, as Germany has learned. And you'll find that they are committed to a smart electorate in Germany because they've learned the hard way. One thing great about travel is you meet more people, different people, who you wouldn't encounter normally in your daily walk of life at home. And I treasure that. I meet more interesting people in 1 month in Europe than I do in the rest of the year at home. And it doesn't need to be earth-shaking encounters. It's just fun to encounter people you normally wouldn't see otherwise. I was in Italy recently, and this little kid was just staring at me. Finally, his dad said, "Excuse my son, he stares at Americans." And I said, "Well, what's with that?" And he said, "Well, last week we're at McDonald's having our hamburger, and my son, noticing the fluffy white bun, said, 'Dad, why do Americans have such soft bread?' And the dad said, 'Son, it's because Americans have no teeth.'" Now, I don't think the dad meant anything about it. He was just doing what dads do when they're out with the kids. He was just entertaining himself by saying stupid things. But the poor kid was confused, and he looked at me, and I showed him my teeth, and I did my little bit to overcome that misunderstanding between peoples, you know? There are so many goofy misunderstandings we have across borders, and when you meet people and you humanize these other societies and they better understand you, it's just got to be a positive thing. And that's one thing I think we're all really into in my work and in your work, people-to-people experiences, you know, really connecting people with real people. One of my favorite countries, and I say this not just because Ireland is sponsoring this event and so on, but I just love Ireland. And I used to think it was because it's seductive, but now I think it's something different. I think it's because in Ireland, I get the sensation that I'm understanding a foreign language. I would love to understand a foreign language. And in Ireland, you've got this wonderful brogue, and I've thought a lot about this, and my favorite part of Ireland is in the west coast, areas they call the Gaeltachts. You know, in a Gaeltacht, it's a national park for the traditional culture, where the government is actually funding the survival of the traditional ways that wouldn't be able to survive otherwise. You know, things like small farms, family farms, and this kind of thing, and people speak in the traditional language and all that, just because it's nice for the younger generation to know from where they came. It's nice that the big city kids have a place to go in the summer to learn their traditional dances and so on. And as a traveler, if you want to see Ireland in the extreme, you go to these places, the Gaeltachts, where people speak Gaelic. And a lot of travelers don't realize that these Irish characters are speaking with each other in Gaelic as their first language. And then the tourist walks up and says hi, and they flip over to you, and they switch right into English. And then you say goodbye, and they flip back into their Gaelic. It's quite exciting to think that these smaller languages are really vibrant now, more so than one generation ago. And when you go to the far west of Ireland, you will find that you're just charmed by the Irish love of conversation, you know, the gift of gab. And I think it's because, this is just my personal theory, that their native language, their first tongue would be Irish or Gaelic, and I bet it's a more romantic and creative way to speak, and then they translate literally into English, and we get to enjoy that as we listen and converse with Irish people in what might be their second language. But I love to go to the far, far west of Ireland, where they stand on the bluff and they look out at the sea and they say, the next parish over is Boston. And then you get caught up in these conversations, and it really is seductive. You just toss your itinerary out the window and you realize this is what it's all about. And you get talking to these guys. I'll never forget talking to this guy, these guys here. And after a while, the guy on the left, I asked him, were you born here? And he paused and he thought and he said, no, it was about 5 miles down the road. Later on, I asked him, have you lived here all your life? And he said, not yet. So you just gotta love that. In your travels, the key to good travels is meeting people. If I'm making a TV show, writing a guidebook, or putting a tour together, if I'm not connecting people to people, I know it's gonna be a disappointing kind of experience. That's what carbonates your travel experience, and I'm sure that in your work with your programs, with homestays and this kind of thing, you understand the value of that as we put students' experiences into reality. Now, the exciting thing about Europe, of course, has been this evolution into the European Union over the last generation. Of course, Europe has its struggles right now, and a lot of people are sort of smirking and joking about this crazy European Union. But the European Union is here to stay, and it's sort of a stuttering evolution. Remember, it started way back in the late 1940s. Can you imagine Europe, bombed out rubble? Europhiles, visionaries, statesmen getting together thinking, we've got to do something or we're going to blow ourselves up again in another generation. Twice in their lifetime, they had gone to terrible war. So they decided we've got to knit our economies together. And since 1947, they've had a stuttering evolution, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, towards unification. It's a tough sell to get people to join a union because it's worthless if people don't give away real sovereignty. So they got to give up real sovereignty to make real union, and they've made a lot of progress. There's steps back, but there's step forward, and you can laugh about their political correctness and all their languages and all the encumbrances and so on, but the fundamental triumph of the European Union is that the economies of Germany and France are woven together so intimately that there will never be another great war in Europe. And as far as I'm concerned, that makes the EU a beautiful thing. Now, Europe is a free trade zone of 400 million people with annual production of $13 trillion. To put it into relative terms, we are a free trade zone of 300 million people with an annual production of the same $13 trillion, all right? And a lot of Americans will say, well, look, we make more money. We're 300 million people making 13 trillion. It takes them 400 million people to earn 13 trillion. Well, the full explanation is, yeah, we make more per person than the Europeans, but per hour, by any estimate, they make at least as much as we do. They just choose to work fewer hours. It's a very interesting concept, but when you go to Europe, it's almost annoying. It's Thursday afternoon in Amsterdam. These are not students, these are grown men. And you ask them, what's going on? Is it a festival? No, it's Thursday afternoon. We get together with our friends. We're living, you see. It's kind of subversive in the United States to think you wouldn't work 40-plus hours a week, but in Europe, you know, they work hard, but they also play hard. I just think it's really exciting as people who care about our country to expect our country to learn from other people's experiences. And my job and my work is to be like the medieval jester. You know, in the Middle Ages, the king actually paid the jester to be annoying. He gave him room and board so he could go out there and learn what's going on and come back into the castle and tell the truth to the powerful people. As travelers, as foreign study people, as tour guides and travel writers, we can do the same thing. We can go out there, find out what's going on, and come home and tell the truth. Some people say that's America bashing. I don't. I think that is America loving. We care about our country, and we want our country to do well in the family of nations, recognizing we're 4% of the 100. Now, of course, everybody's talking about economic crisis. I mean, who termed that phrase, crisis? 90% of the planet would love to have our crisis, I'll tell you that to start with. But we've got our problems here in the United States, and Europe has its problems. And in your travels, and I'm sure as administrators and foreign study advisors and so on, you have to deal with nervous parents and so on. Are we going to send our kids to Greece this year? Or what's going on in Portugal and so on? Well, I'll tell you, there's going to be a lot of demonstrations in the streets in the coming years. You're going to see a lot of that in Europe. And I think there's a very interesting kind of fundamental demographic shift that is the basis of this. We've got it here, they've got it there. Now, Europe has lavish entitlements, more lavish than ours, that are sustainable as long as they have the demographic makeup they had when they made those entitlements. A lot of young people working, not many people living to retirement, and those who do retire don't live very long. Now, when you become very successful, well-educated, and affluent, It's just natural that you have less kids and you live longer. Today, Europe has flip-flopped that triangle, and there's fewer people working, lots of people retiring, and they live way too long. And no politician can stand up in front of their electorate and say, sorry, the arithmetic's just not there. Politicians that try to say that are swept away in the next election, as we see time and time again in the United States and in Europe. But the fact is, the demographics are different. We're geriatric societies. We no longer have so many young people working. We don't get the promise our parents had. And it's tough to change the rules on people when they've worked most of their life with that promise. In Greece recently, the government told people, if you are this old, you got to work. You don't get to retire when you're 58. You got to retire when you're 67. If your friend is 2 months younger or older than you, they get to retire when they're 58. All of a sudden, you have to work till you're 67. That's enough to get anybody out on the streets demonstrating. Europeans get out and demonstrate. In France, it's a manifestation. It's a healthy part of their style of democracy. They march. You get caught up in these marches in Europe. They're quite exciting. I do want to remind you that this kind of exercise of independence and freedom and so on is just too much exercise for most Americans. Rather than march, we're inclined to go home, find a TV station that affirms our outlook, and just shake our fist. You see, that's a good, healthy thing that we do. And in Europeans, they march. I just spent 2 months traveling across Southern Europe through all sorts of places that are supposed to be in terrible crisis. I sure would not want to be a worker there counting on a retirement. But from a travel point of view, we're doing our tours right through all of this, and we're having a great time. I really think it's important not to overreact to demonstrations and so on the streets of Europe. The big news in Europe in the last couple of decades is the movement east. A few years ago, the entire Warsaw Pact joined the European Union. Overnight, the geographic center of Europe shifted from Belgium to the Czech Republic. Suddenly, you got 100 million new capitalists. And it's just a festival of pent-up entrepreneurial spirit in places like Poland you see here. If you've traveled for a long time in Europe, you remember the bleak times before freedom in Eastern Europe. When I look at this photograph, I think of the bleak times in Poland before freedom. I remember on my first trips to Poland, it was so dreary and demoralizing that people were actually taking their windshield wipers in with them at night. They had a clueless command economy, ignoring the laws of supply and demand, and somebody upstairs forgot to order windshield wipers. There's more demand than there is supplies. Thieves get wind of that, they steal the windshield wipers, sell them in the black market, and you've got that sort of an ugly situation going on. Well, of course, today, they got a free economy, the laws of supply and demand are kicking in, and there's more than enough windshield wipers to meet the demand, and people in Warsaw are leaving their windshield wipers on their cars overnight. It is fun to travel in Eastern Europe. It's a new frontier for travel. And I'll tell you, traveling in Eastern Europe gives you a good sense of the variety of Europe and the enthusiasm that Eastern Europe has for getting it together with the rest of the European family of nations. Now, one of the charms for me of going to Europe is the diversity they have over there. And you would think in this age of unification and 300 million people having the same coins in their pockets and so on, that the diversity would be melting away. Counterintuitively, the diversity of Europe now is more than it was 20 years ago. Because in most of our lifetimes, the headlines in Europe have been filled with regions challenging and threatening nations. There's 3 levels of loyalty if you're a European: your region, your nation, and Europe. If you ask somebody in Munich, where are you from, they could say, I'm Bavarian, I'm German, or I'm European. Ask somebody in Barcelona, where are you from? They could say, I'm Catalonian, or I'm part of Spain, or I am European. On the city hall in almost every town in Europe, you have 3 flags: the region, the country, and Europe. So as Europe is uniting, the nations are realizing that they are no longer players, and therefore the nations are no longer threatened by regions that want more autonomy. Throughout our lifetimes, the Basques have been threatening Madrid, Catalonians threatening Madrid, Brittany people threatening Paris, Irish and Scottish people bothering London. Well, today, London, Paris, and Madrid don't really care so much about what these smaller groups are doing, because you can secede from France, but you cannot secede from Europe. And the power is coming out of the European Union headquarters. For that reason, for the first time since 1707, Scotland has a parliament in Scotland rather than in London. This is big news. Why? London is no longer threatened by Scottish autonomy. Back when I was first traveling in Spain, if you danced the Sardana dance in front of the cathedral in Barcelona, that's the sacred sort of ethnic Catalonian ritual, you'd get locked up. Franco did not allow it. Your kids could not speak Catalonian. Catalonians could not even wave their striped flag. They had to wave their football flag to show their patriotism. Of course, today, Catalonians have that autonomy. Kids are speaking Catalonian first in school and learning Spanish as a second language. Every Sunday after Mass, you've got the Sardana dance in front of the cathedral in Barcelona, and they are waving their flag. I was trying to straighten this out with a friend of mine in Barcelona recently, and I said, okay, so Catalan is a region of Spain, right? No, we're not a region. We are a nation without a state. A region implies we're part of Spain, and that's not correct, you see. So there's that wonderful pride you find when you travel through Europe. Here's an ATM machine in Barcelona, and you'll see a good example of the ethnic and linguistic diversity in Europe. The top 4 language buttons on that ATM machine are all Spanish languages. You got Catalonian for the people of Catalan, you got Espanol for most Spanish people, Gallego for the people of Galicia in the northwest, and Euskara for Basque people. Then there's a button for the Germans, the French, English-speaking people, and everybody else. Now, if you were to go to an ATM machine in Basque country, you'd see the same buttons. You'd have Euskara first and Catalan fourth, but you would certainly have Catalan in Basque country because there's a empathy, a solidarity of all of these victims of the tyranny of the majority. It's very exciting in your travels to be tuned in to this whole notion of victims of the tyranny of the majority. I was recently in Ulster, traveling through Northern Ireland, noticed an inordinate amount of tourists up there were Basque tourists and Catalonians. What are all the Basques and Catalonians doing in dreary old Ulster? Well, they're having a good time with their fellow victims of the tyranny of the majority, the Catholic underdogs of Ulster. They stand with them in solidarity. And then, very curiously, I saw on the flagpole at the City Hall, under the Union Jack, which some people call the butcher's apron, you have the flag of Israel. And I thought, what's the flag of Israel doing on the flagpole in Northern Ireland? Well, the people of Israel can relate to the people in Ulster because they are both people who were planted there by the capital city for political purposes. They're not good or bad or anything like that. It's just they're kind of pawns in a political power play. And when London planted Scottish Protestants in Ireland, they were doing that to establish a toehold there. And centuries later, the Protestants in Ireland are dealing with what planted settlers have to deal with, angry indigenous minorities or majorities. And Israelis who are planted in Palestinian claimed territory would be dealing with the same kind of stress. Therefore, they would have sister cities and exchange programs and so on because they can empathize with each other. There are so many exciting things going on in our travels. If we are looking to that aspect of our travels, I think it enriches the whole experience. This man's name is Armin Walsh. He is the Indiana Jones of Tyrolean archaeologists. He's got so much creative energy. And all he wants to do is excavate medieval castles and turn them into museums so people can learn about what it was like in the Tyrol in the Middle Ages. Now, when Armin wants money for his projects, and they're quite expensive, he does not go to Vienna because he would get nothing. He goes to Brussels. And when Armin goes to Brussels, he doesn't say, I've got a great project for Austria, because Brussels doesn't really care about Austria. The European Union doesn't care about false political lines drawn after a war. It really wants to foster and fund the vibrancy of ethnic regions. So Armin goes to Brussels and says, I'm doing something for the Tyrol. And Armin comes home with money for his project. The Tyrol ignores modern boundaries. The Tyrol is part Austria and part Italy, but ethnically it is an honest region. The European Union has sort of an internal Marshall Plan, investing in their infrastructure in a way that is hard to imagine. Now, when you join the European Union, you're either a net giver or a net receiver, depending on what is your average economy. The richer countries give more than they get, and the poorer countries get more than what they give in. The whole idea is that chain is as strong as its weakest link, and Europe is going to invest in Ireland, Portugal, Greece, and so on. In the same way, in the 50s and 60s, our government did the interstate system. We didn't give rich states better freeways than poor states. I mean, philosophically, the idea was to give everybody equal infrastructure, because then we'd be a strong free trade zone. So Europe is doing that, and when you travel around Europe today, when you go to those formerly poor countries, and the countries that I think for no coincidence are having problems today, Ireland, Portugal, Spain, Greece, you'll see new freeways. And those 4 countries, I remember when there were no freeways in any of those countries. Today they're laced by freeways. And when you see a new freeway like this one in Ireland, it comes with a European flag that says, this project has received 85% financial assistance from the European Union. Well, that means France and Germany, and that means you people need to now get on board, use this freeway, because we're going to compete with the United States. So all over Europe, you'll find that kind of investment. I was just crossing the Gulf of Corinth in Greece a couple of years ago, and I came upon this incredible bridge. And when I looked at that bridge going across the Gulf of Corinth in between the mainland of Greece and the Peloponnesian Peninsula, I thought, this is not a Greek bridge. The Greeks wouldn't build a bridge like that. They would still use the funky little ferry. This is a German bridge, built in Greece to efficiently get German trucks into the Peloponnesian Peninsula so they could sell their gummy bears. That's the whole notion of German money in Greece, and the idea is to make that free trade zone. Of course, they're having problems now, and I think one of the reasons they have the problem now, I wish I was an economist to better understand this, but I think that these poorer countries that don't produce as much for whatever reason, in the old days, the scudo in Portugal or the drachma in Greece, it could be devaluated and you could crank down the rewards the entire country would get for its labor, but today they're all tied in with the euro, which is basically tying them in with the Deutschmark, and that makes them falsely affluent when they have to not really deserve it, and something's rotting out at the core. And the way they designed this whole thing, it's easier to get into the Eurozone than to get out, so it remains a mystery how they're going to sort that all out. The fact is, from us travelers' point of view, when we go to Europe, we find incredible investment in their infrastructure. Here we have the greatest new train station in Europe, the big Hauptbahnhof in Berlin. Incredible, breathtaking train. I just ride the trains in Europe just for the thrill of riding great trains. A lot of times I'll just hang out in train stations. I was in the Munich train station recently, photographing trains coming into the station, many of them with little birds squished onto the windshields. Yeah, I know. And when I looked at that cute little bird smashed onto the windshield of this train in Munich, I thought 2 things. First of all, I thought, this is a very, very dangerous continent if you're a slow bird, all right? And secondly, I thought, you'd wait all your life to see a bird squished to the windshield of a train where I live. I mean, think about it. It's a surreal kind of image in the United States to have a bird squished onto the windshield of a train. In Seattle, I could imagine a bird sitting on the rooftop of a train smoking a cigarette, but not smashed onto the window. Europe has fast trains. It's amazing. Now, in your travels, you will see this. Sort of anti-American graffiti and so on, and I'm sure that you deal with this in your work, and I deal with it in my work as a tour organizer. We took 12,000 people on 400 different tours last year. We've been doing this for 25 years now, and I'm always trying to allay people's concerns about anti-Americanism. And what I would say is there's a lot of frustration about American trade policy or American perceived militarism or whatever. But as far as individuals go, people are inclined to like Americans. I've been in places you'd think I'd be blanketed in Canadian flags. I've never felt that it is necessary or a good idea. I think that Europeans and wherever I travel are inclined to like Americans, but they know about American trade policies, they know about our militarism and so on, and they're against it. And we need to be honest about that. Doesn't matter what I think or what you think, it matters what the other 96% of humanity thinks when they look at us. Anybody in the rest of the world knows that the United States, 4% of this planet, spends as much money as everybody else put together on our military. And even Obama can't get elected again without promising more for the military. We are addicted to military spending. Only we have military bases in 150-some countries. Only the United States can declare somebody else's natural resources on the other side of the planet, quote, vital to our, national security interests. The people who are sitting on those resources wish we were candid enough to say vital to our custom material lifestyle, but we say it's vital to our security interests. Time and time again, when there are issues that matter of great importance to the desperately poor half of humanity, half of the planet is trying to live on $2 or $3 a day. A billion people are trying to live on $1 a day. The average lot in life for women on this planet is to walk for water. Well, when there's an issue in the United Nations that really matters to these people, routinely, the United States is outvoted 140 to 4. Who stands with us? Israel, Marshall Islands, and Micronesia. It's an embarrassment. It's an amazing thing. Now, maybe we're right and everybody else is wrong, but the rest of the world looks at us and they see a country with aggressive trade policies and a very militaristic empire. One of the hot-button issues for me in my writing is have I ever allude to the fact that the United States might be an empire. But it doesn't matter what I think. It matters what everybody else thinks when they look at us, and understandably, that's what they see. In our travels, this is a dicey area, but we can teach our students what is a banana republic. It's not a shop in the mall. A banana republic is a reality, and it's important to deal with what is the structural basis of poverty on this planet. What is third world debt relief all about? And then we can better fit into this planet. Again, a lot of Americans travel with this accessory, a Canadian flag jangling from their backpack, and I'll tell you, it is not necessary. I've been in places you'd think I'd be, hiding the fact that American. I've always found it's a plus if we go with the right attitude. If we go with an open curiosity and not a judgmental sort of, we're going to teach you how to do it. And a lot of people are mindful of the fact that, well, we saved them from Hitler in World War II. Aren't they thankful for that? And I'll tell you, I could give a whole talk on little fun anecdotes of how Europeans have reminded me how thankful they are that we saved them from Hitler. I was filming recently in a very conservative part of France, and I was all busy with my film crew. We wanted to get up onto the rooftop and fill the ramparts before the sun went down. It was a cute little mom and pop chateau. This mom and pop, an aristocratic couple who had owned the castle for generations, said, no, we must have a party. We have an American film crew here. And I'm thinking, the sun's going down. I got to get up on the roof for a nice shot. No, bring out the cheese, bring out the fine wine. And then they brought out their American flag, like a religious relic, a precious relic. They brought out the 48-star flag that they hoisted over their village on that great day in 1944 when they were liberated from Nazi tyranny by American troops. And they said, you go home and tell your neighbors and your friends that we are forever thankful for American valor and commitment to freedom and democracy that you showed in the 1940s. I think it's important for us to remember the Europeans recognize that, and I believe most Europeans appreciate the United States for waging a battle of economic attrition with the Soviet Union, knowing it'd be very expensive, but the Soviet Union would bleed white and drop first. And today, Europe is no longer threatened from the East by that aggressive, expansionist sort of ideology. Europe recognizes that, but it doesn't mean that they're going to follow us into our military adventures. And if us freeing, Europe from those menaces comes with an ongoing responsibility for them to march in lockstep with us into our future military adventures, that's where we come to a differing of opinions with our European friends. As people putting together travel experiences with, in your case, with so many concerned and loving parents involved and loved ones who really don't quite know how to assess a lot of news media and so on, it's important that we know how to deal with the concern about terrorism. I find that it's important to be a little more cerebral than emotional about the risk of terrorism. We Americans need to get a grip when it comes to terrorism. Terrorism is overrated, all right? It's hard to say that. You couldn't get elected saying that. I'm not talking about a risk to our country in a sort of a mass kind of way within our homeland. I'm talking about the risk of you or me or our students going overseas. What is the risk? We've got to use good common sense, and we've got to have adequate security, but we've got to keep our minds on what is the big picture. Every year, 12 million Americans go to Europe. Every year, 12 million Americans come home. It is incredibly safe. I can't remember the last time an American was targeted or hurt by a terrorist in Europe. And we got to remember when we're assessing the risk of terrorism, that what is the risk of not traveling? In the United States, we lose 1,000 people a month to handguns. In Seattle yesterday, 5 people were killed by handguns, by some nutcase on the streets. In Europe, they lose 1/10 of the people we lose per capita to violence on the streets. 1/10. Europeans laugh out loud when we're staying home for safety reasons. If you care about your students and your loved ones, you will take them overseas tomorrow. I know it's hard for loved ones to get their brains around cold statistics when you've got entertainment masquerading as news, shaping other people's world's views, you know? But we owe it to our students not to overreact to this. It breaks my heart when there's a bomb in Istanbul and then there's a whole ship of American students come in and the ship turns around and goes somewhere else. You know, it happened a few years ago, and it's ironic for one thing. And I'll tell you, philosophically, if you hate terrorism as much as I do, you understand that the most powerful thing that we can do as Americans is to help our young people travel, better understand the world, and help us fit better into this beautiful planet. It's really important. Now, a fun thing about traveling is we learn that other people have a 4th of July on different days. Aren't these fun little fundamental things? They go, oh, I never thought about that. Switzerland, August 1st. Norway, May 17. It's just great when you travel to realize that everybody doesn't have the American dream. Until well into my adulthood, I thought the world was a pyramid with us on top and everybody else trying to figure it out. And then I traveled and I realized that people don't have the American dream. It's not a bad thing. It's a beautiful thing. Bulgarians have the Bulgarian dream. Norwegians have the Norwegian dream. These Sri Lankans have the Sri Lankan dream. That is something to celebrate. And our students, when they go to Sri Lanka and come home, can be thankful for that beautiful diversity on our planet. Something else we learn in our travels is that there is a lot of pride. A lot of Americans think we have the spine, we have the pride, we have the Nathan Hales, you know? I'll tell you, you go overseas and you realize there's a lot of pride in Nathan Hales over there. I was in Kabul one time, just backpacking my way through Afghanistan. I was sitting in a cafeteria, just minding my own business, and an older man sat down next to me. He said, "Can I join you?" I said, "You already have." He said, "Are you from America?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I'm a professor here in Afghanistan, and I want you to know that 1/3 of the people on this planet eat with spoons and forks like you do. 1/3 of the people eat with chopsticks, and 1/3 of the people eat with their fingers like I do. And we're all civilized just the same." Wow, he had a chip on his shoulder. Every day it seemed like he sat down with an American tourist and said, "I eat with my fingers, and I'm just as civilized as you." And I thought about it, and I thought, you know, he's right. I thought less of him because he didn't eat with spoons and forks. And then I started to get myself in a South Asian kind of frame of mind, and I realized these ugly metal utensils are not what God intended us to nourish ourselves with. That's why he gave us our fingers. And for the rest of that trip, I would go into fine restaurants all across the Indian subcontinent. I'd eat with all sorts of professional locals. There wasn't a fork or a knife or a spoon in that place. There was a ceremonial sink in the middle of the room. People would wash up, and they would use their fingers the way God intended them to be used. It became quite natural for me. In fact, I had to be retrained when I got home. I love that. It just reminds you there are other truths that other people find to be self-evident and God-given. I was once with one of my tour groups in Eastern Turkey, and when you're in Eastern Turkey, it's a great place for a tour guide because it's just everywhere around you. There's wonderful lessons. And, I could just tell you all sorts of anecdotes about this. I'd love to have time to do that. But I remember we were just tooling around. We found a whole stadium filled with high school kids. You don't have a list of famous sites to see in Eastern Turkey. You're just out looking. You're on a cultural scavenger hunt. Stadium filled with high school kids? Stop the bus. Let's go in and see what's going on. 300 high school kids thrusting their fist up in the air, shouting in unison, "We are a secular nation. We are a secular nation." I asked my guide, "What's going on here? Don't they like God?" And she said, "No, in Turkey we love God. But given the rising tide of Islamic fundamentalism just over the border to the east of us, we're very concerned about the fragile and precious separation of mosque and state here in Turkey that was given to us by Ataturk in the 1920s with our constitution." Wow, I didn't know Muslims were worried about the separation of mosque and state. It's exciting to be there and to gain an appreciation of that. Later on in that tour, we were gathered around a woodcarver's table in a village that I don't think had ever seen an American in anything other than on a TV screen. And we were gathering around, and he was a very popular and famous in his region woodcarver. Every mosque wanted a prayer niche carved by this man. He was puffed up and showing off, and he was so proud to have 20 Americans gathered around his table. Suddenly he stopped. He held his chisel high into the sky. I remember it glistening against the blue, and he declared, "A man and his chisel, the greatest factory on earth." And I thought, he doesn't need me to tell him what is a fulfilling life and that he should get computerized and market his work a little better and so on. It was a joyous moment for me to gain respect for that man with his chisel. All over this planet, there are thrilling and inspirational struggles going on that most Americans are completely clueless to. I was raised thinking Ethan Allen, Nathan Hale, Patrick Henry, the ultimate. And then you travel and you realize they're great, but they're a dime a dozen on this planet. Every ethnic group has their own Nathan Hales, and every year 8 or 10 languages go extinct. And they don't go extinct with fanfare, they just get so weak until finally the last person who speaks that language dies, and one little bit of less ethnic diversity on this beautiful planet. Something that would really be important, I think, in all of your programs would be to find a contemporary Nathan Hale that you can empathize with and celebrate and get your brains around. A good example would be Archbishop Oscar Romero. If you have programs in Central America, what a thrilling, inspirational personality and story when you learn about structural poverty and the land issues and the place of the church and liberation theology and escape theology, and a leader named Archbishop Oscar Romero. He stood with the people in their civil war. We think of it as a war between capitalists and communists and all that kind of thing. To me, it was a war between big landowners and landless peasants, and the church hierarchy, the bishop was supposed to stand with the big landowners, but he ended up standing with the peasants. He predicted I'll be shot. He was shot. He predicted he would rise again in his people. He did rise in his people. Today, when you travel in Central America, you can experience that. I've had the opportunity 4 times to go down to Central America on trips, educational tours with the Center for Global Education from Augsburg College. There's many great programs like that that are such a rich experience for anybody who wants to be global in their activism when they get back to the United States. I went down for the 25th anniversary of the assassination of Archbishop Oscar Romero. I was due for a vacation with my family on the beach in Mazatlan. And I was invited then to this 25th anniversary of Romero. I was envisioning me with a pristine stretch of tropical beach, swept free of local riffraff. I was going to have a plastic strap on my wrist where I could get unlimited margaritas. It was going to be a wonderful vacation, Mazatlan. And then I ended up going to El Salvador. And I knew that was the place for me. And I'll tell you, on day 2, I was covered with bug bites, eating rice and beans one day, beans and rice the next, having the travel experience of my life, marching with thousands of Salvadorans. As we marched through that town, gaining an empathy for their struggle, we came upon a monument. And I looked at this monument, and I rubbed my eyes, and it was like, wait a minute, that's our monument. That's the Vietnam Memorial. And there it is in San Salvador, the capital of El Salvador, with just as many names chipped into that black granite. And I thought, whoa, 50,000 dead loved ones, all died fighting the United States. Now, maybe they were communists and we needed to kill them. I don't even want to get into that. But it is baggage. There's a little country of 4 or 5 million people that lost as many people as we lost in the entire Vietnam War fighting that battle. And that stays with a society. And when we travel, we understand the baggage that shapes people's lives, their political agendas, their societies. We Americans certainly have baggage, don't we? Think of the baggage we have in our country, in our lifetimes. We've had Depression baggage, we've had World War II baggage, Japanese, German baggage, communist baggage, Vietnam baggage, 9/11 baggage. Well, other countries have different baggage that's just as legitimate as our 9/11 baggage. We lost 3,800 people 12 years ago or whatever. Well, Iran lost a lot of people 2 decades ago fighting a guy named Saddam Hussein. Several 100,000 people. And I wanted to understand their baggage. A few years ago, I went to Iran so I could better understand what makes them tick. I just wanted to humanize 70 million Persians. And I thought the only way I can understand Iran is to go there, given the media and the political situation in our country. A lot of people ask me, why did you go to Iran? I thought about it, and I think I realized I'm going to Iran because I think it's good character to know people before you bomb them. It should hurt. It should hurt. And I just wanted to know who they were. So I went to Iran, and it's a very complicated thing to go to Iran. I made a 1-hour TV show for public television, and by the way, if you wanted to watch it, you can just go to Hulu and watch it anytime you like, but it was really an eye-opener for me, and I've got a 1-hour talk that you can Google and see also. But I was there with my film crew, surrounded by hateful graffiti, 8-story tall posters painted on buildings that say, "Down with the United States," with our flag made out of dropping bombs for stripes and skulls for stars. It was painful. But I didn't want to just accept that. I wanted to meet people and find out who put that there and why is it there and what's going on. And I'll tell you, I've never been so warmly received in a country anywhere I've ever worked or traveled as I was when I was in Iran. We came very close to leaving our big camera in Athens and going with our little sneak camera because I thought they'd be throwing stones at us when they saw an American film crew on the streets of Tehran. I'm so glad we brought our big camera in. I was stuck in a traffic jam on this same day. Lots of traffic jams in a city of 12 million people. And I'll never forget, we're just sitting there silently, and the man in the next car asked my driver to roll down the window. He did one of these things. He handed over a bouquet of flowers, and he said, "Give this to the foreigners in your back seat and apologize for our traffic." Now, I don't know about Houston, but that doesn't happen in Seattle. Later on, I was in another traffic jam. It was just silently, and suddenly my driver just burst out. He just said, "Death to traffic." And I thought, wait a minute, I thought it was death to Israel or death to America. And he said, "Right now it's death to traffic." I said, "Well, what's with that?" And he said, "Well, here in Iran, when something is frustrating us and out of our control, we say death to that." And I thought about it, and it occurred to me, well, that's kind of like damn, like damn. I don't know about you, but I don't know if you've ever thought, damn those teenagers. I've thought, damn those teenagers. Now, did I really want them to die and burn in hell for an eternity? No. But it's after midnight. Turn down the music. Damn those teenagers. Death to teenagers. That's basically what it is, So Iran has a lot of frustrations, and they say death to a lot of things. Death to election fraud, death to Ahmadinejad, death to, Obama, death to traffic. And I just thought, isn't it good that we can understand these things with a little more sophistication than a simplistic bumper sticker? How many Americans can see it with any kind of complexity? It's just not in our makeup these days. We need to travel. We need to understand that we need to empathize from where these people are coming from. What are their frustrations? Iran is a beautiful country to travel in. It's a country that has a very strong and proud heritage, and it's a country that has 1,500 years of incursions from the West, and that needs to be respected. As I mentioned, 20 years ago, a guy named Saddam Hussein, funded by the United States of America, invaded their country. They had the same carnage on their front that we had between France and Germany in World War I. They lost several 100,000 people. Now, maybe we don't believe that. Maybe we don't think we funded it, but they think we funded it. They think all these people are dead. Today, every town in Iran has what they call a martyrs cemetery, a vast martyrs cemetery. Every town. We visited several, with faces, with flags, with prayers, and with widows. Widows who every week for 20 years have come here and sobbed on their lost loved one. Now that's baggage. That is real baggage that we need to recognize and understand. I think it is so valuable to meet people face to face and to hear them and to understand them. I didn't know anything about Iran more than what Ted Koppel taught me. And I think I'm a typical American. And we are very likely to go to war with that country. And then I stood on the streets of Iran for a couple of weeks, and I gained an appreciation for who these people are. I was just doing my work one time, and this well-dressed woman came across the street to me, and she said, "Are you an American journalist?" I said, "Yes." And she did one of these things on my chest, She said, "I want you to go home and tell the truth. We're strong, we're united, and we just don't want our little girls to be raised like Britney Spears." Now, silly as that sounds, that is the driving concern that Iranian moms and dads have. And we have a hard time realizing that because we didn't have to raise our kids under a dictator put on our throne by somebody far away so they could have our resources. And when the Shah was in his power, they were bragging that the miniskirts are shorter in Tehran than they are in Paris. Now maybe we say, well, just get over it. Our miniskirts are fun. But if you're a small town Iranian, that's the devil, and who put it there, and what's going to happen if they put another guy in the throne, and who are these people from the West that they want to do a regime change? If we do a regime change on them, we put another Shah on the throne, and they've got another family values problem. Who are these people voting for Ahmadinejad? They are the small town, less educated fundamentalists, motivated by the same thing their counterparts are here in the United States. They're good people, loving parents, motivated by fear and love. This is exciting to learn about this. But if people don't travel, we never will. And our nation will be led into wars that can be avoidable. I'm so thankful for the opportunity that we have and the commitment we have as a society to keep young people traveling, even in austerity times. It's really exciting that this is still strong, and I'll tell you, I believe it's more important than ever. To sit down with a class of schoolgirls like this, and to hear their teacher bark at these girls. Girls, you look like a bunch of floozies. Cover your hair, or this Western gentleman's going to take your photograph. And then they finally giggle and get their hair right, and we're all okay. I tell you, I just love that. And if we can get our students in touch with their students, it becomes much more difficult for their government to demonize us with their propaganda, and for our government to demonize them with our propaganda. This is powerful. This is important. Now, we Americans love our liberty, but it's very important to remember that other people are into liberty too. There's a little town in Spain that thinks it even has more liberty than us. This is the hometown of Salvador Dali. Double the dose of liberty. And wherever you travel, you see this local pride and this love of life. There's a little town in Italy that has a celebration every year where the older kids teach the younger kids how to make a good ravioli. I just love that. And in our travels, we can have that sort of, childlike approach to the whole world, and we can grow up comfortable with this whole family of humanity. This little kid here is my son, Andy, and this is Andy Steves. He's got a booth here. He's running a program that puts together 3-day weekends in Europe for kids studying anywhere in Europe, and they'll just meet Andy or one of his guides in any of 6 or 8 great cities in Europe for that kind of experience. And I was just hanging out with one of Andy's groups in Barcelona last month. I learned a lot about the value of what all of you are doing. I saw these kids on the street with a good guide having a well-organized, 3-day weekend, and it occurred to me, they've got beautiful teeth for sure. Look at those teeth on these darling kids. And these are probably all A students. I bet they're just, top of their class. But what struck me is how naive and green and curious and wide open to the world they were, and what a beautiful thing it was to take these beautiful kids, put them out of their comfort zone, steep on the learning curve, and make them eat a whole plate of anchovies. Gross. And they were eating ugly things on toothpicks, getting out of their comfort zone, having the time of their life, and they were forever changed. Silly as that may be, they'll understand why people in Barcelona like their little fish. All over the world, we can gain an appreciation for things. We can go to a little town in France. This is a small town in France where the Chamber of Commerce thought it was worth getting the money together to make these orbs so visitors could develop an ability to smell and appreciate the fine differences between the local wine that they produced. Beautiful thing. And of course, we know that the Europeans appreciate their fine wines, and in tough, austere times, they also know where to fill it up really cheap. I just love traveling around Europe and getting that kind of insight. To meet people who love to pay too much for their bread in order to buy it from the person who baked it. That's family values. That's the fabric of their communities. And if we can, of course, we're going to go home and buy a freezer to put in our garage, so we only need to go to the big box store once a month, But at least we know there are people who like to have a loaf of bread baked this morning, and they won't have breakfast until they've got that fresh bread. All over the world, people are force-feeding animals and grossing out other people, and I just think it's important for us not to censor what we see, not to censor what we acknowledge exists. I think next month they're going to outlaw foie gras in California. But I'll tell you, next month, thousands of English people are going to travel to France to enjoy foie gras. It's a big part of their economy. And it's very important when we travel to meet these geese farmers and understand just how nice it is to be high on the food chain, all right? One thing I've learned from my travels is that Americans are really enthusiastic about legislating morality. We legislate morality. My European friends, who are much more densely populated and a lot of diversity and a lot of history, tell me a society has to make a choice: tolerate alternative lifestyles or build more prisons. And then they always follow that up, reminding me that we arrest 8 times per capita the amount of people that Europeans do. Either we are inherently more criminal or there's something goofy about our laws. These are very important fundamental issues that we can learn in our travels. Prostitution's a good idea. In your travels, your students will encounter brothels, legal prostitution in many, many countries. Are they in favor of prostitution? No. Nobody thinks prostitution's a good thing. There's just the reality. There's always going to be lonely, horny men who will pay for sex. You can make it a capital punishment and it's not going to go away. And in Europe, they've got an approach that is pragmatic harm reduction. Let's not make it a crime and fill it with violence and money and criminals. Let's treat it as an education challenge, a health challenge. Let's encourage the sex workers, as they call them, to unionize. And they only get a license if they're checked by a doctor or a nurse so they're not spreading diseases. Let's let them run a little business so when they get a bad customer and they push their emergency button, a pimp does not come to their rescue, but a policeman does. You know, that's just the ideal. It doesn't always work that nice, but in Europe you'll find they're inclined to not moralize, not say just say no, but realize it's going to happen. Let's deal with it in a pragmatic harm reduction kind of way. It also makes an interesting tourist attraction when you're in Amsterdam, I'll tell you that. I was recently in a little restaurant in Zurich. I needed to go to the bathroom. I went downstairs, stepped into the toilet, and blue lights. What's with this? Blue lights. And then I realized, oh yeah, blue lights. I cannot see my veins. And then I remember, oh yeah, in Switzerland there's a lot of needle addicts out in the streets, and there's a lot of public access restrooms, and they don't want junkies shooting up in their toilet. It's just gross for their customers, you know? So they put blue lights there, and the needle addicts have to go somewhere else. Across the street, there's a machine that used to sell cigarettes. Now it's been retooled, and it sells almost free government-subsidized needles. And I never noticed this before. When you go to Switzerland, you'll see these needle machines bolted onto railings all over the place. It's just a low-key way to help local needle addicts not spread diseases by sharing needles. Now, we would moralize and say, no, that's encouraging people to be hard drug users. No, it's just a way to cut back on disease. And then down a little low-key lane about 100 yards away, there's a place called Cafe Fix. It's a government-sponsored heroin maintenance clinic where people go to get their addiction administered. They don't need to steal to get their hit. They don't need to buy their drugs from people on the streets wondering if it's been cut properly and risk getting overdose death. Last year in Europe, 8,000 people died from overdoses. In the United States, 18,000 people died. It's a problem not going to go away. In the United States, we're more likely to criminalize it, force people out in the streets, and more people die. In Europe, it's just a pragmatic harm reduction kind of thing, and they like that approach. Of course, marijuana is a very interesting issue in the United States right now, and it's not a very interesting issue in Europe right now because it's just not a big deal over there. They haven't arrested a pot smoker for 25 years in the Netherlands, and in Europe, what they've realized is use does not go up if you have easy laws. Europeans have much more progressive laws on marijuana than we do, and by every measure, our government's measure and their government measure, Americans smoke twice the pot per capita that Europeans do. The people in Portugal 10 years ago legalized the consumption of all drugs. Very bold move. They just had an assessment of that, and 10 years later, the people who were for it and against it agree that this is smart policy. Use has not gone up. You take the crime out of the equation, you take the money out of the equation, you treat it as a health problem and an education challenge. A lot of Americans have this fear that there's a whole reservoir of people that would love to ruin their lives smoking pot if it was only legal. The fact is, anybody who wants to smoke pot does. And we arrest 800,000 people a year for marijuana possession. Not rich white guys, poor people and black people, people who can't afford to go through life with a conviction. It's a very difficult problem. These are interesting issues, and we can deal with these in a very fun and creative way when we travel. We can find out how other societies are dealing with the same persistent problems we are here at home, and I think it's a challenge to work those thoughtfully into our tour programs and curricula. When you study Europe, you realize that the United States and Europe are very similar. We're both affluent, highly educated, capitalistic, Christian continents, and there are some fundamental differences. It's always been curious to me. Lately, it's occurred to me that we're all government by, for, and of the people. But here in the United States, I think we're government by, for, and of the people via the corporations that we own. It's not a judgmental statement. It's just the fact is, as a society, we like to have a government that makes a very good environment for our businesses to prosper. Now, in Europe, they have government by, for, and of the people in spite of the corporations that they own. In Europe, you would see a law requiring people to pay for the disposal of their car when they buy it much more readily than you'd see that in the United States because it's not good for business in the short term. In Europe, they have governments protecting the long term, protecting the poor, protecting the environment, and so on. It's an interesting challenge. They're learning from us. We can learn from them. I believe if you want to see Europe in the extreme, the place to go is Scandinavia. That's the least church-going, most affluent, most socialistic, and most satisfied and content society anywhere, at least in Europe. And when you go to Scandinavia, you realize they're not unreligious. They are humanist. They really believe in sort of the religion of a smart society working together. This is my own psychoanalysis of it, but I noticed on the main square in Stockholm or Copenhagen or in Oslo, you've got a city hall rather than a church. And it's designed like a church. It has a big nave. It's got a pulpit instead of a lectern instead of a pulpit. It's got beautiful murals of mosaics celebrating not Bible stories, but heroic individuals who have contributed mightily to their society. It's quite an interesting thing to go to Scandinavia and see how they organize their society and if they like it or if it's some sort of a socialistic nightmare. I love to talk to my European friends and just use them as sounding boards. In my tours, we have things called reflection period, where we sit down with our European friends and we just have a chance to have questions. And I'd be very careful not to be the tour guide here. I'm the conduit, just interpreting for people and directing, helping move the conversation along, but letting my tourists talk directly to locals. I remember asking my friend Ollie, we asked him, well, how can you Swiss people, Ollie and his wife Maria share the one teaching position in a little village high in the Swiss Alps, little tiny poor community where everybody's got the same last name. And we asked Ollie and Maria, how can you Swiss people so docilely pay such high taxes? And without missing a beat, Ollie said, well, what's it worth to live in a country where there's no homelessness, where there's no hunger, and where everybody, regardless of the wealth of their parents, has access to quality health care and education? Now, he's not a crusader. In fact, he's kind of a conservative guy in Switzerland, but that's just a European ethic. It's not right or wrong. I'm certainly glad I'm running my business here in the United States rather than in Europe. It'd be demoralizing to try to employ people with all the constraints that go on to European entrepreneurs. But I'll tell you, we can learn a lot from how they organize their society. One thing I've sort of observed is we Americans are beautiful people with big hearts, but we're not very good about reckoning with the difference between rich and poor, the gap between rich and poor. And when you travel, if you travel honestly, not on the beach in Mazatlan, but on the streets with the people in Managua instead, then you realize this glaring gap between rich and poor. If you roll down your window, it's filled with hands coming in like this. For all my life, I've been aware of that, and I find it really honest to know what's out there. It's such a treasure to have a sense of that. And then you realize that even if you're motivated only by greed, if you know what's good for you, if you know what's good for your family, you don't want to be filthy rich in a desperately poor world. It's just not a pretty picture. You don't want to raise your kids behind designer fortifications. You don't want to live in a little middle-class community like any community in Latin America these days that has to pool its money and hire an armed guard on the street corner just so people can walk to school or go to the park. I was just down in Central America, and every bank, every hotel, every big business, every corner has an armed guard. and people who are wealthy are living behind designer fortifications. That's not where we want to go. I tell you, when you travel, you realize the preciousness of those children, just like the preciousness of our children. We're so quick to say, take care of the kids. I remember when I was first getting sensitized to this sort of thing, my friends would say, wait till you have kids, you get more practical. After we had kids, it became even more apparent that these little girls living on a garbage dump in San Salvador are just as precious as our kids and just as deserving. And as I mentioned, there's a full billion people on this planet trying to live on $1 a day, half of humanity trying to live on $2 or $3 a day. The average lot in life for women is to walk for water, to abandon their children and walk for water, and every year they have to walk longer for water. Now, when we look at our kids, we love them. We saw those girls I just showed you in Barcelona. They've all got beautiful teeth. My girl's got enough money for straight teeth and money left over for whitener. I noticed that every girl in her class, every kid in her class had enough money in their family for straight teeth, money left over for whitener. And that's a beautiful thing. We've got a winning system. We work hard, our kids get white teeth. But that doesn't deny the fact that for the cost of 2 sets of braces, this thirsty village could have a well. And those mothers could stay home and take care of their kids instead of walk for water every day. That's not a guilt trip, that's an opportunity. That's exciting. And my dream is someday the United States of America would realize that soft power is actually more powerful than hard power. Because we want to win hearts and minds, and we can hire advertising agencies to do that. We can put in governments. We can send troops all over this planet. But for $10,000, you can put a well in a little village, and then every day, every mother in that town, instead of walking across the county, will walk across the street for water for her family. And when she pumps that pump handle and fresh drinking water comes out, she's going to think in her own language, God bless America. That is a powerful thing. And when we travel and we humanize our friends south of the border, we can come home and help make this world live together more peacefully. Now, we've got a lot of impressive challenges facing us as a society. That's why I never give talks during this month. I'm always in Europe during this period, but when I talked to my friends at NAFSA and had the opportunity to share these ideas with you, I said, man, I want to be here because I want to celebrate the work you do and also just share the lessons that I've learned in my travels. We've got some exciting challenges confronting us like never before. We've got the problem with the frightening aspects of radical Islam that we got to deal with. We've got climate change. We've got the gap between rich and poor. And I'll tell you, every person in this room cares, and every person in this room has a different worldview shaped by our life experience. All of us have that different worldview because of where we've lived. If we have a loved one who got killed in a drunk driving accident, we got a different worldview. If you got a loved one in Afghanistan, you got a different worldview. If you fell in love with somebody from Canada, you got a different worldview. If you've traveled a lot, you've got a different worldview. We're all recognizing the value of travel. The value of travel is nothing new. 1,500 years ago, Muhammad said, don't tell me how educated you are, tell me how much you've traveled. Thomas Jefferson traveled, and he wrote that travel makes a person wiser, if less happy. Mark Twain traveled and famously wrote, travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. And I've traveled enough to know that it is a beautiful, beautiful experience to broaden our perspective through travel. Let me just close with a beautiful image that meant a lot to me as a tour guide. I love taking my groups into Turkey and confronting things that might be a little scary. For instance, a whirling dervish. I wanted my group to meet a whirling dervish. I found this dervish in Konya, and I said, I'm a tour guide. I've got a group of people. We'd love to watch you whirl. And he said, well, I'm not a photo op, but you can watch me pray if you let me explain what I'm doing. I said, that's cool. So I took my group up under the roof with him, and he was dressed up in his outfit, and I'll just paraphrase here, I forget exactly what he said, but essentially he said, I'm a monk, I'm a dervish, and I'm a follower of Mevlana or Rumi, sort of the prophet of love of Islam, kind of like your St. Francis. Easy to kind of embrace and get your brain around the teachings of St. Francis and Mevlana. And he said, 5 times a day I come up under my roof, I plant 1 foot in the center. That's my family, my hometown, my community. The other foot goes around, acknowledging the variety on God's great creation. 1 hand goes up to accept the love of our Maker, and the other hand goes down like the spout on a tea kettle, pouring, showering God's love on his beautiful creation, on my hometown, on my family, and on all the variety in this beautiful world. And I get into a trance, and I spin, and I lose myself in that thought, and I become a conduit between our beautiful Maker and this beautiful creation. And we looked at him, and I'll never forget, as a tour guide and a teacher, standing there with my group, and the eyes of my travelers open wide as that man got into his trance, his robe billowed out, his head tilted over, and all of a sudden he was less scary, more meaningful, and I knew each of my travelers was changed. They would go home with just a little better understanding of a different slice of this planet. And it was clear to me, if you can take that understanding home and then implement it in your everyday life, that's the most precious souvenir. That makes travel a political act, and that makes all the work that you're doing so important. Thank you very much, and good luck with your work. Thank you.
Wow, impressive. Awesome. Good. I'm wondering if we should just...
Just 5 minutes. Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, thank you all. Thank you, Rick, very, very much. I'm incredibly inspired myself. I'm sure you are too. Rick said he'd meet people out back later, but we've got time for maybe one question from each mic.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, again, I'd love to hang out back. I talked a little long. It's just exciting to talk to you. And I'd love to answer a couple of questions. Here, a question.
Hi, I have a question from Twitter. Many people ask the same question. It's how can we encourage our students to challenge themselves, have meaningful experiences, and learn from the local people?
How can we challenge our students to learn?
How can we encourage our students to challenge themselves?
Well, I think the key is to get out of our comfort zones. I mean, that's the real challenge, is to have that adventurous spirit and get out of our comfort zone. So often, we're afraid to actually make a mistake. Making a mistake opens up some of the very best doors, and I think that would be a key there, that's for sure. Question here.
Hello, my name is Ali. I come from Canada. I don't have the Canadian flag here with me because I feel safe. Anyways, I saw your the clip you had about Iran. I happen to be born in Iran and raised in Iran, but I'm Canadian now. And the thing, the reason it made me Canadian is that I fled the suppression of the Iranian regime.
Right.
And the movie you made about Iran, and I saw it myself, gave everyone the impression that it is such a rosy country. And from what I understand and from what I've experienced, I spent 4 years in prison as a political prisoner, as a professor, and I did not see all my life all the beautiful pictures you had from Iran. And it's fine to show that beautiful picture because I love my home country, and I think you did a great job. And I'm glad that I was here to hear what you said. You're a wonderful speaker, and I really, really enjoyed it. And I thank NAFSA for bringing you here. But I have one problem with what you created, and that you never showed the other side of Iran and what the criminal regime of Iran has done to the people.
I appreciate that point, and it's well taken. My goal was to not show all of that ugly reality of Iran. It's a horrible regime, and it's a lack of freedom that they're living under. And I went to the university. I remember I hoped to see some freedom at the university. I thought of any place, and I just saw free spirits with clipped wings, and it really depressed me. On the other hand, I was doing a travel log, and I thought all we get is the horrible end of Iran, and what I wanted to do was take an opportunity to understand, before all of this Shah time and everything, what is the rich heritage of Iran, and to inspire people to learn more about Iran and recognize that there's 70 million beautiful people there, and it's a rich culture that we should check out. I should mention, I'd love to give the talk on Iran, or just to encourage you to see the show. If you haven't seen it, you can see it anytime at hulu.com, and I've got an hour talk that you can just Google Rick Steves in Iran. Also, as you came in, you picked up this brochure. This is just 32 pages out of Travel as a Political Act. And this is a book that a lot of teachers are using in their programs to give people an introduction to these societies. I said a lot of things here that are just kind of teasers to get more into issues in Central America or Iran or Europe or whatever. And there's a chapter in this book, which is my journal when I was in Iran. I'm certainly not an expert on Iran, but I had a rich experience there. One thing I'm trying to do is find creative ways to use the material that I have for my travelers, make it available to teachers who can use it in their work. And we've got a place on our website called Rick Steves for Teachers. If you just go to ricksteves.com, all of this material is available for half price, my art book, my skills book, my political book, my TV anthology. And I've got an app where I've got 5 years of radio programming that is all deconstructed and then organized into country-specific playlists with a whole wealth of information on every country and the regions I cover and all the guided tours, and it's entirely free. You can just download that Rick Steves Audio Europe, and then you would have all of that information that you can listen to as preparation for your travels. And that was what's on the flip side of this editorial that we wrote about the value of foreign studies. So I hope that you could find more information about that if you want to have any more of the kind of things I just touched on today. As far as Iran goes, I would have loved to have more time to get into all of that. I mean, we could have talked about the Baha'i issue, we could have talked about all the people imprisoned, the lack of political freedom, but I just figured I wanted to do something nobody else has ever done, and that is look at the other side of the coin.
Thank you very much. I'm sure you'll find quite a crowd outside.
Okay, I'm going to, again, we're kind of exhausted our time here, but I just love to hang out and talk with people, and I don't have a booth, so I'm just going to stand out in the hallway out there, and we can talk and take pictures and whatever you like, okay? Thank you so much, and thank you also for the good work you're doing.
Thank you very much. See you tomorrow at the luncheon. Good job.
Oh,
excellent.
I hope that was
Excellent.
okay. I
Oh, it
talked
was
a little
great.
bit long.
Yeah, no, they were riveted.
Oops.